right, hi guys. We're going to go through freight quotes now. A lot of people have some questions about how that works, and I'm going to kind of walk you through it. This is kind of part two because part one suggests that you already have a quote or a document that says this is what the thing is, and we'll talk about what that's all about. We're going to go through all the quote steps here one at a time. So with the quote, obviously you have the cost of the item. You have to decide how many units are you going to bring in. If you're going to bring a small amount, a big amount, obviously 100 baseball caps might be this big. 1,000 is a completely different freight quote. So you're going to get that and add all that freight to the cost from the manufacturer. I'm going to show you how to do the customs duty rate, if there is a duty. Some places don't have duty. And we're going to add some fees, which are typically a one-time fee for the entire order. I'll explain that a little bit. And then you divide the number of units by the landed cost. You divide the number of units to get the landed cost, sorry. And we've got, we talk about less than container load here, which is kind of typical. We're going to use a rate of $175. What you do is you get what the cost of a cubic meter is, and you multiply that by the number of cubic meters that you have. We're going to use 175. A quick note on CBM. Cubic meter is abbreviated CBM sometimes, small CBM. Sometimes you have it abbreviated as M3. 3 is up there. And one more note about currency term. When you have terms, what currency are you working with? It should be on there. The timing for payments. This is what you're receiving as the quote from the vendor. You can say, wow, what are the terms, which means basically Incoterms, which is where ownership transfers. We're going to talk right about that. How long is this quote valid? Obviously, you need the details and what are any other particular paperwork pieces required there. Here's a story about Incoterms. Incoterms are the terms that are used for freight, international terms. Consider the factory is right here. If you buy from using EXW, buying straight from the factory. This is the most common one, FOB. Notice the nice imagery here where we're getting it on a ship and it arrives, and this is you, the importer. This is what's coming in, and you'll know what those costs are depending on what the freight quote is all about. So typically what we're doing in some of this exercise here is we're typically picking something from Hong Kong, which would be a Shenzhen port, or it could be a Shanghai port. There's lots of ports, Ningbo, there's a whole bunch of ports along China that are typically running to West Coast USA. It can typically go to Long Beach. There's a huge number of containers that come into Long Beach every day, and that's where a lot of America gets their stuff. You can, of course, go through the Panama Canal, which is still just this water part here, the water section. And you can bring it into Gulf of Mexico or New York or anywhere else from there. So here is a container. Surprisingly, they say that there are more containers below than above. I find that hard to believe, but sometimes that's how it works. It's big business, big literally in many ways, big business. Here's another little bit more complicated chart about Incoterms. What's interesting here is that trying to make this go down here. The seller's responsibility is clearly in green, buyers in yellow. Here's your FOB right there, free on board, which means the seller is bringing it to the port and putting it on the ship. When it drops over the rail, it is now owned by the buyer. That's how the yellow comes in here. One of the more common ones is CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. If they have a good rate, they can bring that stuff all the way to a port. Somebody who's shipping out a lot. The idea is that if you're buying from a factory over here, you don't really have that. If I'm buying from a small factory in Honduras somewhere, I'm not about to arrange all the shipping from this port all the way to here. Just like that same vendor maybe from Venezuela or China or Bolivia or wherever. He's not going to have enough idea as well as you on how to deal with the logistics on this side. So you pick it FOB is the most common one, and 99% I think is going to be FOB, CIF being also pretty common. Lots of different reasons for different products, for using different Incoterms, but like I say, it's important to understand that risk transfers at the point where it is owned by you, obviously. Now, if there's insurance, their risk is picked up right here. So anyway, that's a good illustration of what Incoterms is. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add the duty rate. And what I've done here is I've already set up the code. I've set up the website here to search for your product. And we're going to go over to that right here. And what's going to happen when you hit that link is you're going to put in a search here. I don't really like the search here. It's a pretty big document. So I'm going to look at each chapter here. And here are the different chapters of terms for duty rates. Now this is what's being added on as a percentage. Coffee, tea, spices, cereals, meat, ores and ash, fertilizers, plastics and articles and thereof, wood articles, pulp articles, silk articles, cotton articles. I can go through all these different chapters. I've opened one here randomly, a cotton, maybe I'm looking for cotton t-shirts or cotton hats or something like that. But typically you'll see a loaded up document, a government document with lots of rules and regulations and notes and things like that. But here's where you have the harmonized subheading, or the heading and the subheading. And here's cotton thing that is a duty-free item here. Here's something very complicated. You don't have to worry about this, but this gives you a familiarity or just some introduction. Here's something that's 4.4 cents a kilogram, if you can see that. Some things have per unit, some things have percentage. That's all we need to go through this. There are thousands of different items that you can look through. Umbrellas, iron, steel, animal, vegetable, or mineral. They've basically covered everything here. And it's kind of complicated. A lot of the times, the shipper knows what they're talking about. The shippers will say, well, that's what we do all day long. Also, you can ask the advice from a manufacturer. If I'm a manufacturer in China and I export hats, I'm certainly going to know what duty rates are and things like that because I'm an expert. You should be an expert if you're the exporter, so you can ask about that. A lot of items are duty-free. Electronics are typically duty-free, and sometimes you're going to find duty on apparel that may be surprising. There's thousands of categories for different types of apparel, so it can get really complicated. So don't get bogged down with that. Don't forget that there's an important step with the duty rate. Let's go back to, so people always ask about what happens when stuff falls off. It's pretty rare. It's always insured. This illustrates some of the size of the industry. It's a pretty amazing industry. They say that there's one container dropped over the rail into America at Long Beach every second of the day. Something like that, every couple of seconds. I believe it. Let's talk about the customs fee. That's the second thing that you're going to do. Basically, customs is a handling paperwork fee, and it gets bogged into lots of different little fees. As you can see here, the handling, courier, processing. You have to get documents here and there. The bill of lading has to be included. Rather than get bogged down with that, we're going to just pick a rate here, which it usually, to me, comes into less than $200. So for our exercise, we're going to use $180 for this one-time rate. No matter how large the shipment is, you divide the number. We'll see how that kind of plays out. If you have a small shipment, you're paying $180, it could hurt. If it's a big shipment, a giant shipment, this paperwork is nothing. It's insignificant. So what I'd like to do is run it through a landed cost scenario here. This is what it would be for 2,500 pieces of hats. This is actually a pretty high price for hats, but let's just use it for nice round figures here. I know 2,500 pieces of hats is going to be about 5 cubic meters. Now think about a cubic meter. What is it? It's a meter. It's this long, right? A meter is this long. So you got a meter right here. It's your desk. Your desk is about a meter deep. It's about a meter high, and it's a meter wide. That's your cubic meter. So you got 5 of those that take 2,500 hats. That's basically how it works. You've got the freight. Each cubic meter is $175. There's $875. Your processing fee is going to be $180. We already figured that out. Now, we went to the tariff schedule and we found that the hats are 12% of FOB cost. How am I getting that? 2,500 hats at $2 is $5,000. times 12% is $600. A lot of times people get surprised at customs and they get handed a bill. Things change and people are handed a bill. If you haven't looked through what that is first, you're asking for trouble, and you're going to get handed a surprise bill of a lot of money. It could mess your profit margins up a lot, and you, the shipper, are eating that cost, whatever it is. One thing that we didn't talk too much about is inland freight, but for this scenario, if the goods landed in LA, they're offloaded, they're not at my warehouse, and let's say we're in Colorado, we're going to say, I need it to be in Denver, so I'm going to find a truck that's going to send it here, and we have to line that up. Sometimes air freight or sea freight companies can do everything. Sometimes you find a separate guy that runs freight from LA to your door. Here I'm picking a $400 cost, which I think is low, but it's just a scenario here. So what we're doing here is adding up the customs, $875, that shipment here, the customs tariff is $600 and $400 to freight, and it's 2,055. Divide that by the number of hats that we bought, and you come to 83 cents. This is less than container load scenario, so your $2 caps are now $2.85, $2.83. That's what it costs to get all the way to your warehouse. So there's a number of pieces that go in there. This is less than container load. Let's take a look at a full container. Now there's typically, our previous slide said that we've got a cost of the full container of $2,800 here. Now, a full container also fits 28,000 hats. It's quite a big difference. I will note that if I'm buying 28,000 hats, $2 is a really high price now. I'll probably be able to take advantage of that. But again, for this cost lesson and scenario, we're just going to run through $2 each, and it's $2,500. By the way, if I divide the 28,000 per caps and everything, it comes to $10 per cubic meter. Although cubic meter doesn't matter, it's a full container. It's pretty much a lot less expensive to run a full container, obviously. The customs tariff fee, that's 28,000 times 2. The FOB cost is $56,000 times 12%. Is $67.20. We're going to add that on there, and here's that processing fee. Now you can see how it's pretty insignificant, and the landed cost is now $2,800 plus 67 plus 180. It's $9,700. Dividing 9,700 by the 28,000 comes to 0.34, or that's really 35 cents. Round up, make it simple, $2.35. So you can see from $2.35 on a full container versus $2.85, there's a big difference. I think the reality is that it's much less. Like I say, this $2 cap for volume, you're going to get a better price than you are for a couple thousand caps. But this illustrates it's much better to compete if you can try to get a full container. Not always so easy. Again, that's full container is the size of a house. That's quite a big business. And here's some interesting, cool looking ways that they run that. So these are the common ones. They're not less than these are non-less than container loads. We were talking about a 20-foot container and a 40-foot container. They have a 40-foot high cube. There are several other types of containers, but these are the common ones. And we already decided that $2,000 is what about roughly for a 20-foot container, and $2,800 is what the price is roughly for a 40-foot. These might be a little bit low. They might be inaccurate. For now, I'm just coming up with rough prices. High cubes are not very much more than the 40-foot. So I'd say maybe $3,000 for a high cube. Why do we use a high cube? Well, if you're shipping pillows and mattresses, you should pack your container as big as you can all the way up to the top. If you're shipping pipe, you can only fill about half the container because of weight limitations. You certainly would be wasting a lot doing it that way. So those are extremes there, but some people use the high cube and it's gotten kind of popular that way. So when the ship goes to America, it has to be, or wherever you're importing it into, it has to be pulled off the ship, the container, the airport, the airplane, wherever it is, and dropped here. Now, one thing I didn't talk about was air freight. Air freight is size is important. Airplanes are limited on the size of things, and length times width times height, and that locks in a rate. And we're going to use $300 per box right now, and you got to add all the customs and paperwork. Thank you very much. This is Tom Gailey, TG Consulting, And I conclude my report